So what's the playlist that defines your generation? You know, those songs that everyone knows, the ones that just capture a whole moment in time. They kind of feel like they just appear out of nowhere, right? Well, what if I told you that for an entire generation, one person basically wrote that playlist? A kid from Brooklyn who went from being a street-smart troublemaker to a total musical legend. Let's get into it.
I mean, really think about it. How does a simple tune become an iconic anthem that people are still listening to 100 years later? Today, we're going to break down the story of George Gershwin to figure that out.
Okay, so let's rewind the clock. We're talking the early 1900s. Meet George Gershwin. Back then, he was just a regular kid running around Brooklyn, way more interested in causing trouble on the streets of New York than taking music lessons. Seriously, the guy had zero interest in music.
And one day in 1910, this massive piano gets hauled into his family's apartment. But here's the twist. It wasn't even for him. It was for his older brother, Ira. But as soon as that piano was in the room, George sat down and just started playing. And he couldn't stop. It turns out he had this incredible raw talent that completely shocked his entire family. And this wasn't just some casual hobby. By the time he was 15, George was so sure that music was his future that he made a huge call. He dropped out of high school to go all in on music. I mean, can you imagine telling your parents that? But, he had a plan.
He landed a job at a place called Tin Pan Alley. And the best way to think of this place, it was like the music industry's ultimate boot camp. Picture a building full of tiny rooms with hundreds of songwriters, all trying to write the next viral hit 24/7. George's job was to be a song plugger, which meant he sat at a piano all day long, playing new songs for people, trying to convince them to buy the sheet music. It was a tough, competitive grind, but it was also the perfect training ground for learning what makes a song a hit. And all that grinding, all those hours spent in that tiny room, it was all about to pay off in a huge, huge way. He was about to write the one song that would completely change his life forever. So in 1919, he co-writes this tune called Swanee. But when it first came out, nothing. Crickets. It totally flopped. It was just another song in a sea of new music that was going absolutely nowhere.
Until the biggest star of the era, a singer named Al Jolson, heard it. Now, you gotta understand, Jolson was basically the biggest influencer you could possibly imagine back then. He decided to perform Swanee. And just like that, the song went completely viral, 1920 style.
And when I say viral, I really mean it. Jolson's recording of the song sold millions of copies all across America. This thing was a massive runaway hit. And just like that, with one song, George Gershwin became a household name, almost instantly. He went from being this hardworking kid to a legit music industry star. And that success gave him the freedom and the cash to start thinking way bigger, like writing entire Broadway musicals.
But George wasn't working alone. He was about to team up with his most important creative partner ever, the guy the piano was originally for, his older brother, Ira.
They were the absolute perfect team, probably because they were total opposites. George was the outgoing, impulsive one who would dream up these incredible melodies. Ira was the quiet, careful wordsmith who would then craft the perfect lyrics to match. You can kind of think of them like a legendary streamer, that's George, and their pro-level editor, that's Ira, working in perfect sync to create something epic. And their process was actually super efficient. George would write the music first, just full of all this energy and emotion. Then he'd pass it over to Ira, who would meticulously fit these smart, witty lyrics into every single note and rhythm. And together, they wrote some of the most famous songs in American history.
But even with all the fame, the money, the hit Broadway shows, Gershwin wanted more. He didn't just want to be a pop star, he wanted to be respected as a serious classical composer. He had a much, much bigger goal in mind.
See, at the time, this was a huge debate. The serious music critics kind of looked down on popular music like jazz and blues. To them, it was just simple entertainment, not true art. And Gershwin, he set out to prove every single one of them wrong.
So he unleashed a series of total game changers. In 1924, you get Rhapsody in Blue, which brilliantly smashes together the energy of jazz with a classical orchestra. A year later, his Concerto in F proved he had the technical skills to write complex, traditional music. And then, with An American in Paris, he literally used an orchestra to tell a story, even bringing real Parisian taxi horns onto the stage as instruments.
What he was doing was absolutely revolutionary. He smashed the walls between different kinds of music. He proved that an American sound,
a sound born from jazz and blues, belonged in the world's most famous concert halls. He didn't just break the rules, he wrote brand new ones.
But Gershwin was building towards his ultimate artistic statement, the one project he considered his greatest achievement ever.
It was an opera called Porgy and Bess. He called it a folk opera. And to get the sound just right, he actually spent time in South Carolina soaking up all the local music. And in a really groundbreaking move for 1935, he insisted on having an all-black cast. Oh, and it also gave the world one of the most famous songs ever written, Summertime.
But here's the thing. It wasn't an instant hit. You know how sometimes the most amazing, forward-thinking art is a little misunderstood at first? Well, that's what happened here. But over time, Porgy and Bess has been recognized for what it truly is, a masterpiece, and one of the most important American operas ever written.
So Gershwin was at the absolute top of his game, with so many more ideas and projects in the works. And then, tragically, he started having these severe headaches. He was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and he died in 1937. He was only 38 years old.
When you look back at his short but absolutely brilliant life, you really see his true mission. It wasn't just to write jazz or classical or Broadway hits. It was to take all the sounds of the country he loved and mix them together to create something totally new, a uniquely American sound. So really, the most important message is this. George Gershwin created a timeless playlist by blending every kind of music he heard around him, from smoky jazz clubs and flashy Broadway stages to grand concert halls and local folk traditions. He showed the world that all of it was part of the American story. His music defined his generation, and it's still inspiring people today, which kind of leaves us with one final thought. 100 years from now, when people look back, what songs, what artists, and what sounds will make up the playlist for your generation?